Hold on. You gotta unmute yourself there. Oh, there we go. Now we
There-
got one. We got one person on. So let's get this started. Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome to Minds Behind the Music. I am your host, LA. Here with
And
me.
I'm Mike.
Yep, from RetroSpinVinyl.
Yes.
I brought him today for a special topic, which is vinyl, specifically these two records in particular. If I could get them in the shot.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin's 3 and Led Zeppelin 4.
Oh yes.
My two of my all-time favorite Led Zeppelin records. And I figured today we're going to talk about just like the vinyl record and just the quality of the record overall, just the quality of the album. And I know that Mike over here has a lot to say about, just the vinyls and just the pressings and all that other stuff and all the release, just how the records themselves were released too.
Yeah, so starting with Zeppelin 3. So as the title implies, Led Zeppelin 3 is Led Zeppelin's third album. It was released in 1970. It was actually Led Zeppelin's it actually was the most anticipated album of 1970. And in the US alone, pre-orders were nearly to 1 million copies before the thing was released. Of course, due to the complexity of the album cover, which we'll get to in a moment, that would actually cause a 2-month delay to this album's release. But let's talk about the music before we get to the release of it. The music on this album. So the first 2 albums by Led Zeppelin were Zeppelin 1 and Zeppelin 2. The first 4 albums by Led Zeppelin go in numerical order, similar to the other day, LA talked about Chicago. Well, their first 10, well, actually, most of their albums are numerical, so it's kind of the same thing. But the first 2 albums were very heavily rock-oriented, mainly blues rock, even though there were psychedelic elements to it. But this would take a crazy left turn. It would turn the rock music into more folk and acoustic. Don't get me wrong. Anybody who has heard anything Led Zeppelin knows one of their biggest hits is Immigrant Song. That's the opening track to this album. And we all know that's a rocker. Rock elements are throughout this album still. It is shown in Immigrant Song. And of course, there's another song which is a deeper cut called Gallows Pole. There's only 2 hit songs off this album, Immigrant Song being one of them, and the other one was Since I've Been Loving You. And other songs are popular within the Zeppelin community, but of course, those are deeper cuts. And unless you're a big Zeppelin fan or a record fan or all that, you might not necessarily know them. If I start talking about the song Tangerine, I see Sunny's commenting in the chat here. I invited her to join us today. She knows Tangerine. Lewis, LA knows Tangerine. I know Tangerine. And a handful of others know Tangerine. It's one of my favorite Zeppelin songs. But yeah. Great acoustic song. One of Zeppelin's best deep cut acoustic tunes, and some of Robert Plant's best vocals. But this album really showed the band's abilities to be more than just rock music. And it's interesting because you would think that maybe, in the late 60s, there was a lot of psychedelic music, blues rock, just rock and roll, if we consider bands like the Rolling Stones in at this time. But maybe this album would actually be maybe a second album release, given that in the late 60s, folk and acoustic started becoming electric, and it was becoming more popular ever since Bob Dylan electrified acoustic, which I believe happened at Woodstock, if I'm not mistaken, which everybody booed him off stage for that, but now look where everybody is now. People are fickle, but
everybody's a critic.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll get to critics when it comes to this album, trust me. And so it's interesting that it came out in 1970 after folk music was pretty much dead at that point. But it showed the band's ability to do this. And it really specifically showcased the great abilities of John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones, for those who are unfamiliar, was the bassist of the band. And that's what his main job was. However, of all of the band members, he was the instrumental virtuoso of the band. Because on this album, he plays the synthesizer. Back before synthesizers were really popular. Double bass, as well as the mandolin.
And organ.
And the organ too. I didn't know if that was on this album, but I know later on in releases like Houses of the Holy, yes, the organ is definitely featured. No Quarter is a perfect example of that with like the keyboard and organ and all that. But yeah, the more acoustic arrangements on this release would later on kind of pave the way. This is almost like a musical turning point 3 albums into their career, because you got this hardcore, like hard rock kind of stuff, and then you get the folky acoustic mixed in with the rock. Then this kind of music and elements would then be featured throughout the rest of their career. You listen to the first 2 albums, you don't get anything like this. But then you go this album forward, you get some folky and more acoustic-based tunes, more ballady ones, kind of, for a way to say it even. As I said, all tunes are rockers at this point, and then later on it would be influenced. So the album cover, I can't English. Look how crazy this is. Now, for those who are used to streaming or digital copies or anything like that, and I'm not bashing those who do that, I do it just as much as I listen to physical media.
Very psychedelic too.
It is psychedelic. It's kind of randomness, but what's cool about this album cover is that, if you can see, it spins. There are holes within this, and there's various pictures and photos and all this that match the album cover and match the gatefold cover with similar imagery. The back cover is just a photo of the band. The Bohemian Rhapsody Queen look before Queen popularized it with
Queen 2.
With the Queen 2 album cover, as well as a Bohemian Rhapsody music video. But the album cover is, as I said earlier on, is what caused the delay in this, because the artist who did this album cover is by the name of Zacron, I think. It's a Zacron. I think Zacron is how you pronounce it. But anyway, he took every band member individually, did a photo shoot of them, and made these photos into a collage. If you notice, like, this is a photo of the members. That's
Jimmy Page, right?
Yeah, that's Jimmy Page. Yeah, I had to look at it not through the camera and see. Then later on, I'm just using the Big Hole as an example. There you have John Bottom there, the drummer of the band. So there was all this stuff, but also there's various other objects, but really the main focus is the band members themselves, the 4 of them, and aviation type imagery. So you'll see various airplanes and blimps and figures with wings or angels or something like that, or a butterfly and all that. And you know, that's kind of creative, because until I heard the band name Led Zeppelin and looked more into it, the funniest thing, when I first looked up Zeppelin, I didn't type in Led. I was like, oh, Zeppelin, that's just the name of the band. You know, it works. You know what? I got a bunch of photos of blimps. I did not know a Zeppelin was a blimp. So that's kind of where the aviation flight kind of imagery comes into play. And as I said, blimps are in there too. Led Zeppelin's debut album cover, Led Zeppelin, the giant blimp. Too. That is a Zeppelin. The gatefold is Zeppelin too as well.
They got the famous Hindenburg crash? Mm-hmm. That was the one that crashed in New Jersey, right?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. So a little bit of the critical acclaim to this album. There was a very mixed bag with this album. So Zeppelin 1 and 2, their first 2 albums, loved them. Everybody loved it. There wasn't a whole lot of negative press around it. This one, as I said, mixed bag. A lot of people loved it. A lot of people hated it. Many bands, or many critics, were saying that Led Zeppelin was copying the sounds and ideologies of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, the music they were creating at the time. Yes, Neil Young was in the band at that point. And Jimmy Page disputed him, was like, some of these musical elements and styles were in the previous records. It's just not quite as predominant because we didn't emphasize it as much. And the negative responses and the lukewarm press bothered Jimmy Page so much. And for those not familiar, Jimmy Page is a guitarist of the band, that he refused to do interviews for a little over a year, 18 months. And as we'll go into it later on with Zeppelin 4, all this negative press was the reasoning behind why Zeppelin 4 had no written material of any sort on the album cover. And even though back in 1970 it was the most anticipated album and a lot of people were disappointed, in 1990 the album became platinum by 2 times. And by the end of that decade, 1999, it was 6 times platinum. I'm not sure what the numbers are for the today's day. That's actually a statistic I looked up for this video and this conference that we're doing here. I didn't find any modern numbers for it, but that's it's a popular one, and I know that Sunny, who's in the chat here commenting to us, this is a great album cover. I agree.
Yeah.
This is one of her favorite Zeppelin albums, and when me and her did a collaboration over at my channel, she said it's one of the most underrated,
Yeah.
if I'm remembering correctly. And yeah, it's a hidden gem. I can understand why people bypass it. It's kind of one of the most obscure sonically ones because of the mass changes within the rock and the folk rock. But really, it's never bothered me. But also, I discovered Zeppelin in the late 2000s. So I have the whole discography at my fingertips. I've heard their music on classic rock radio all this time. I'm used to hearing things like Stairway to Heaven, which didn't even exist at this time, and all these other more acoustic-based songs with the rockers. So I was like, oh, Zeppelin, okay. Well, for the time, I could see why people would be kind of thrown off by it. But
And one thing I noticed, I think that I wanted to mention about that going platinum in the 90s, I think Robert Plant and Jimmy Page were a duo in the 90s.
yes,
And I
yes,
think they performed a lot of
they did 1 or 2 solo albums. I own one of them on cassette called No Quarter, which they re-recorded some of their Zeppelin works, as well as, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a hot minute since I've heard that, but I believe they also did some original tunes on that, which is very good, as well as a 1993 box set reissue that Jimmy Page did, because it's notoriously the original Zeppelin CD pressings sound like terrible because they did not use the original master tapes, and there was a lot of tape hiss and all this stuff on the original CD versions. But yeah, I think that those modern reissues, as well as the Page Plant duo, definitely helped with the popularity of Zeppelin and revival of them as a whole, especially this album.
Yeah, and I think that they performed a bunch of Zeppelin 3 songs too, like Gallows Pole. I think they might have performed That's the Way. Which is another one of my favorite Led Zeppelin tunes. I think That's the Way is by far one of my favorite Zeppelin tunes and one of my favorite acoustic tunes because of how oh, of how like simplified it is, but at the same time it's very complex because I noticed in Led Zeppelin 3, a lot of Jimmy Page's like acoustic guitar tunes are using like custom tuning, like different tunes. Like he uses like open F, open G flat. Like he experiments with like the tunings a lot on this record, which I don't think we've seen in a Led Zeppelin album yet.
No, it is not. I think he also even did an open C6 tuning, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, to think about.
Yeah. And I must say, talking about That's the Way and Tangerine, as I mentioned in Gallows Pole, I talked about earlier, if you're looking for the more acoustic side of this album, the B side is where you want to go. The A side is what kind of has the more rock and the folk mixed into it. Don't get me wrong, all of it's great. But if you're wanting to really experience the folk rock stuff before you experience and dive into the whole reason why many people struggle with this album, at least initially, listen to the acoustic B side and then see what you feel. So, but that's all I have to say about Zeppelin 3. Was there something you wanted to say any more, Lewis, or was there something or you wanted to talk about with this album that I didn't mention?
At least opinion wise, originally, like when I first got into Led Zeppelin, which was say about 2014, 2015, it might have been even later than that. Well, I first started listening to Led Zeppelin around 2013, 2014. I was still in high school. And when I first listened to Zeppelin 3, I wasn't too crazy about it because, I was still in that like metalhead phase, that hard rock phase. Like I wanted to listen to like hard rock and heavy metal. I didn't want to listen to anything simplified. And I
Right.
didn't really, when I was younger, I didn't really appreciate this album as much. But when I started getting into music production and music recording, I started taking classes. I started to learn to appreciate Led Zeppelin a lot more, and especially this album in particular, because of the just hearing the way the acoustic guitar sounds, the way that all the other instruments are compiled together, and the way that they were like panned between each other, and the way that certain instruments were like overdubbed. It made me learn to appreciate this record in particular even more. And I again took time to listen to the album again, like, because whenever I was a kid and just listening to the album, I would always listen to the real popular songs off of it, like Immigrant Song and Since I've Been Loving You. I never really bothered to like listen to the other acoustic songs, because I was very close minded at that age, and I didn't really take the time to listen to it. But as I got older, I learned to appreciate a lot of the songs here more, which I think what you mentioned in the review, in how the critics first took Zeppelin 3, was also kind of how I took it when I first listened to Zeppelin 3. At least when I was growing up and getting more into this kind of music, I learned to appreciate it, and I'm sure that's why people learn to appreciate this album more so in the future.
Yeah, without a doubt. And speaking of the production, the acoustics, and the way things are panned, I must say, even though you hear it in songs like Ramble On, when you go to Zeppelin 2, the album before this, you really hear the production quality skyrocket in this album. Don't get me wrong. The first two albums' production is not bad, but man, the way they take care of the acoustic instruments. And to think that this album, a lot of it was recorded in a cottage that did not have any running water or electricity,
Yeah.
which really adds to the impressive nature of it. Because I would
Mhm.
have to assume that they had handheld tape recorders that they had to tape this to, or handheld reel to reel, whatever they were using, 4-track or tape or whatever. Um, I would say when I first started listening to bands like the Beatles, it was in the time late middle school where there was like, oh, we're talking to people on the bus at the same time. So I'm listening to it in one ear and I'm just like, oh, I hear some laws, and that's about it. It's because of the way that Beatles panned their albums later on in their career. Because I was listening a lot of the times, it was like Magical Mystery Tour or Sergeant Pepper back in those days. And I would venture a guess the way they did the production style of this, even though it's not as big and grand as George Martin's arrangements on Sergeant Pepper, I would say the production value is just as good, and maybe the acoustic version of it could be related to a production style wise. I think that it could possibly be comparable to this.
Yeah. I think that could be said with a lot of the Led Zeppelin records, at least a lot of them, a lot of the earlier to like a lot of the earlier stuff from their first 4 or 5 albums. They can definitely be compared to a lot of the Beatles works, like Revolver, or even Rubber Soul, or
Oh,
Sergeant Pepper.
I must say, the Beatles were really one of the pioneers when it had to do with messing around with panning and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
I, even though stereo was starting to become more popular in the later 60s, even though as of 1960, stereo recording was readily available and started to become a thing. Um, Stereo at that time, in the early days, in the 1960 when it was first happening, it was reprocessed. A lot of it was fake stereo, as many call it. It was recorded in mono and then channeled into 2 channels, and then they call it stereo. So everything was just dead center, no variations or anything. And that's actually why, for me personally, even though on today's technology and all that stuff, it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, I personally prefer to buy albums 1959 and older recorded in mono, because that was the way the technology was. Going from around 1960 to 1965, 67, I could take either or. I will prefer mono in the earlier dates of that range compared to the later range, because stereo was, as I said, the fake stereo, and it wasn't
Mhm.
as good as when in 1967 you have bands like the Rolling Stones putting out their Satanic Majesty's Request, or the Beatles with Sergeant Pepper, or uh, You
Even
get
Cream.
Pillow from Jefferson Airplane, all these things where they have crazy effects and all this fun stuff with them.
Yeah,
That
or
really adds to it.
yeah, or you could even think of there's another one that's whenever I think of experimentation and like 60s music when it comes to mind, I think of Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys.
Yeah, that's another very valid one as well. It's funny. We named a trilogy: Pet Sounds, Sergeant Pepper, Their Satanic Majesty's Request. They were all influenced by each other in that order.
Yeah, that was I'm pretty sure Pet Sounds was Paul McCartney's favorite. I think Paul McCartney himself said that was his favorite album by the Beach Boys.
It might be. I'm not sure. And I know LA, you put it on the screen back when it was commented a couple minutes ago. But I agree with Sonny that many people don't dive into it and only hear the hits, and that's what makes it so underrated. Because it's not like an album that we're going to be talking about shortly, Zeppelin 4, where even if you don't do a deep dive, you know almost everything.
Yeah.
And so I agree.
And before we get into Zeppelin 4, I noticed that a lot of the like with the late 60s and early 70s recordings, or at least when they're when they're mixing, they tend to do panning was like a huge thing for them. Like if you hear Cream records, or if you hear Black Sabbath, or even Zeppelin themselves, you could hear the guitar and bass pan from each other, like one's pan to one side and the other's pan to another side.
Yes.
And it's the panning was like a huge thing in that era, and I think that's one of the things that makes Zeppelin 3 shine the most, and what makes their records before and after that shine really well. But I think in Zeppelin 3, panning is really what strengthened the record.
I would agree. And really, as a whole, records, I mean, don't get me wrong, when things are all centered in the middle, they don't sound bad. But you get more dynamic depth when you cross over the pannings. Oh, Hendrix, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Without a doubt. Man, you mean
Hendrix as well. His records were definitely like top tier when it came to production, and when it came to like just recording and all that other stuff. Just when it came to production, like Hendrix's albums are another fine example of like this what we just mentioned before, because it's in that realm of late 60s, early 70s.
exactly. And I'll tell you, people will either rock or bust in regards to modern reissues of albums.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I'm a nerd and like the older stuff because I find that to be cool because from the era, I will happily have a good reissue. At the same time, I'm not going to be like, oh, no, I don't want that as reissue. No, I'm not like that. I'm not a snob. But like, I'll tell you, Jimi Hendrix's catalog, the reissues that came out in 2010 for his albums, which are I don't think they've done a reissue remaster since. Reissues, yes, but remaster, no. The same audio from the 2010 era, just repressed. So freaking good. I was blown away. I was expecting something a little flatter dynamically because you get a little bit more flatter sound with some reissues from that era, which is actually kind of surprising. You'd expect that from the albums from back then due to the fact of them not having the technological advances that we have today. Because the same thing with Kiss's Love Gun. I have the 2014 repress, remaster, and I have an original from the late 70s.
Mm.
I was expecting the one from the 70s to sound a little better. No. The Kiss reissue sounded better. It popped more. Both had the good qualities for right reasons. But someone told me a long time ago they don't like the band Deep Purple because you could barely hear the bass. Well, the bass is there. It's just the way production was back then. You could barely hear the bass in Kiss or Sabbath, and maybe Sabbath is a little bit of an exception with their distortion and all that. But the bass was not a predominant thing back then because they're used to hearing how music sounds today, EDM music and all this stuff. Yeah. Well, it just wasn't as predominant back then. Nowadays, you hear it a little bit more, except for And Justice for All by Metallica. You don't get any bass on any version of that, but that's a whole nother story.
Quite honestly, I think I think Metallica is another example that like the music kind of suffers because of the production or the budget they had for their production. And I think Deep Purple probably suffered that as well, which is why you can't hear the bass or you can't hear certain things. Like you can't hear certain things shine.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Deep Purple had a little bit of a different story in regards to their history and production, and Justice for All was a very odd exception. Um,
Yeah. They just did they just didn't want the or Lars didn't want the bass there.
well, yeah, that, and I mean, thrash metal of that time also had a lesser um, bass compared to metal, what metal became. So, partly because of the technological advances, and also just how the music was in the subgenre.
Yeah. What's up, man? The Red Sings the Blues. We got man behind the mic or Greg, my my lovely co-host and or I co-host for his show.
Very
How you
nice.
doing, man?
Welcome, welcome. So we got Sunny and we got Red.
Yep.
And what perfect timing because we're now on album number 2 for the day. The second album we're discussing is Zeppelin 4.
Yeah,
Now,
this is the one that everybody knows.
everybody and the mamas and grandmas know this.
Yeah.
So, Zeppelin 4, as I said when talking about Zeppelin 3, because of the negative press that Zeppelin 3 got, it discouraged Jimmy Page. But then Jimmy Page kind of convinced the whole band. The whole band wasn't thrilled, but it really affected Page most. Didn't want any writing or anything on it, just imagery. So you have this guy with a bundle of sticks. You got some buildings in the background, and it really plays and it all works together as a nice gatefold. And then you have
the inside. Yeah.
then you have this statue looking thing. And that was all you got. You didn't even get a catalog number on the spine. I can't even show it on camera. You wouldn't be able to see it, even if I did. But so this is what you got. And this is even more bare bones than what they did in the late 70s with In Through the Outdoor. Because In Through the Outdoor, yeah, you didn't know what album cover variant you were going to get. But at least the brown bag had Zeppelin In Through the Outdoor and the Beast, and then the back cover of the brown paper bag had the track listing, you know?
I think
so,
House of the Holy did that too. Like they did they just did the at least in the front cover they did they had no writing on it.
yeah. And but at least I believe that the spine of House of the Holy, if I'm not mistaken, I think it at least had some writing on it. It might not have. I could be mistaken. I haven't truly touched House of the Holy in a hot minute. But since I did the collaboration with Sunny here, but I listened to the CD versions of all this and just pulled out the records for the video. I'm not even gonna lie. So I haven't really deep looked at the cover in a while. But that's a little about the artwork, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But this is the album, as we both said. It features a band at their some of their best, and is the stuff that everybody knows. This features what would be their standard tune that everybody knows, and one of the best classic rock songs of all time, "Stairway to Heaven." Just don't play it in Guitar Center; you will get kicked out. Due to the lukewarm commentary, the record made the band choose to do all that stuff. And this album, due to the fact that it had no titling, has been referred to by many things. As you've heard me and LA talk about, we've said Led Zeppelin 4. Well, it was also called Zoso, which I'll explain that one in a moment. Runes, four symbols I could explain shortly, and also the fourth album. Runes, I don't know where that comes from. I don't know how to explain that one. But Zoso comes from the inner sleeve, which features this logo that says Zoso. I'll explain these logos shortly. And then four symbols is how the name came to be for four symbols. And then Zeppelin 4 and the fourth album it's their fourth album in their catalog. And as I said, I have no idea where Runes came from. I guess Zoso became popular of these symbols because it's the only symbol with words or letters. All the other ones are just generic shapes, which don't mean a whole heck of a lot unless you read into it a little bit. The band was only represented by these symbols. The band is not named at all anywhere. Jimmy Page is named as a producer on this album, but that's about it. The band is called by these names or these symbols. So the Zoso is Jimmy Page himself, the guitarist.
Mm-hmm.
The circle and triangles were John Paul Jones. I'm not sure where the imagery of that comes from or how it plays into, but the three, do you know?
Yeah, I believe that is a triquetra. That particular shape that John Paul Jones has. That logo, I believe, is called a triquetra.
Okay.
And from what I remember, because I did look up or I did see this one video about their logos or about why they have their logos. I believe that one in particular represents confidence and competence, which is a pretty accurate description of what John Paul Jones or what he meant to the band.
Yeah, that makes sense. The three circles represents John Bottom, the drummer. You can look at it and be like, oh, those are drum heads kind of thing. And then the quill and circle represents Robert Plant, the vocalist, writing down the song lyrics and all that stuff. The record label was very much so against doing this in this way. Having no title or any imagery or words on the cover. Blasphemy. You're committing musical suicide. You're never going to get anywhere. How are you going to market yourself? Well, Led Zeppelin held their ground. They would refuse to surrender the master tapes until they got their wish.
Yeah.
And they won, and the record label, I'm sure, is quite happy with how this album went. Because of this album in the United States, no, actually not just in the United States, worldwide, sold 37 million copies and is one of the best-selling albums of all time, at least in the United States, being at the 6th highest-selling album in the United States. Of course, we have other albums like Michael Jackson's Thriller, Eagles' Greatest Hits, the first one. We have Dark Side of the Moon, AC/DC's Black and Black, and then one other one that's like another one or two before this one. But, and on the charts, it went up to either number 3 or number 2, but there was only like 1 or 2 albums that were ahead of it on the charts.
Set up.
What's that?
Oh, I was saying I'm gonna look that up, like with the album or just the singles from the album.
What, with the best-selling album?
Yeah, with Zeppelin 4. Like, you mean the singles, like their places in the charts?
I meant the album chart, like when it came out and where it peaked. I believe it was like number 3 or number 2, because I know at one point Sly and the Family Stone was above them with "There's a Riot Going On," which is the album covered by Sly and the Family Stone with the American flag on it. And then I know Carole King's album Music also was above Zeppelin 4 at one point, but I don't know if they were. All 3 of them were chronological, and Zeppelin 3 or Zeppelin 4 was the 3rd rank, or if they made it to the 2nd rank, and those 2 were just in front of it at one point. But I know as of 2020, this album sold 23 times platinum, and as I said earlier, the album, it was released with crazy high praise, and understandably so. And they were happy, the world, that Zeppelin came back to more of their rock roots. But the rock roots was not solely what was there, and the blues rock was not all that was just there, because they had their acoustic stuff as well. Because you get the songs Battle of Evermore and Going to California, which acoustic based, very acoustic based, pretty much. Well, only guitar and vocals, so the popular songs that everybody would know off this album, from rock and roll radio and all that stuff, classic rock, you got Black Dog and Stairway to Heaven. But other popular notable tracks that you would know most likely, other than the fact that the entire freaking track listing, because everybody knows most of these songs, would probably be Rock and Roll, Going to California, and When the Levee Breaks. And if you don't know When the Levee Breaks from Led Zeppelin, if you like 80s hip-hop, maybe you would know it from the opening track from the Beastie Boys album, License to Ill, because the Beastie Boys sampled the drum pattern of When the Levee Breaks for their song. I forget the name of that song at the moment, but they did do that. And in my opinion, even though this is one of Zeppelin's most popular albums, I would have to say the song Misty Mountain Hop off this release is probably one of the most underrated deep cuts. because of how popular this album is and how fun and upbeat that song is, in my personal opinion. And what's crazy about this album is it's as if the band knew that this album was going to be a hit with the song Stairway to Heaven, because you got the track listing and a few credits and the band member symbols on this side. But on the other side of the inner sleeve, it is all of the lyrics to Stairway to Heaven. How they mastered that, how they knew they were going to do that, I don't know. Maybe they just wanted to have the lyrics to that song because of how long it is. Because back in these days, you couldn't just Google or genius.com or whatever, find the lyrics. You had to listen to the album and write it down in a notepad. Or if you were lucky enough, plug it into your word processor at the time, if you were lucky enough to have a personal computer at this time, which in 1971 when this album came out, you probably didn't, because it wasn't until the later on in the 70s that popularized computers like the Commodore PET would come out, and then of course later Apple products, and then Apple IIe, and the Apple II in the late 70s, and the various models in the 80s, early 80s, Apple IIe probably being one of the most popular ones in 1983. And that is actually the computer that was the first computer my father had in his household back in the day. We still have that to this day. LA, I think when you were out to my house, I think I've even shown you it. And it worked.
Yeah, I think you did.
Yeah, my dad back in the day typed up to the lyrics to Raining Blood by Slayer. That thing. So he had it. But I would imagine that because you had to write down the lyrics and all that stuff, Stairway to Heaven is a long song. That's a pain in the rear end. All the other songs are shorter. Maybe it wouldn't be a big deal. Maybe that was their logic. I don't know. But I think it was a very convenient how well that worked. You love the folk vibe of Zeppelin 3, but Zeppelin 4 is amazing. My favorite are Going to California, 4 Sticks, and Levy. Yeah, you can't go wrong with any of them. 4 Sticks is probably the song I know least off this album for no particular reason. It's just the one that, for whatever reason, isn't the one that sticks to me most. Oh, no pun intended, sticks to me. But anyway, yeah, I'll tell you, it's just great stuff. And some popular Zeppelin tunes actually were recorded during this time, but were not released on this release, because 3 songs from these sessions of Zeppelin 4 would come out on the Monolith release that would be Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti, which the week of this live stream celebrated its birthday. And the song's Boogie with... What's that?
Yeah, I think it was 46 years, the 46th anniversary, because it came out in 1975, right?
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, the songs Boogie with Stu, Down by the Seaside, and Night Flight were all recorded during the Zeppelin 4 sessions that would end up on Physical Graffiti later. And actually, an early version of No Quarter was recorded during this time, but then, of course, it became what it became for the release Houses of the Holy, a release later, the album after the Zeppelin 4. And yeah, there's not a bad thing that can be said about this album. Maybe you could say that Stairway to Heaven has been overplayed and has been beaten to a pulp more than a dead horse. But yes, it was Beastie Boys rhyming and stealing. Thank you very much. You are correct 100%. And yeah, Stairway to Heaven maybe had been beaten to crap. And you hear it every time you go in a Guitar Center or something like that, from some newbie who's learning the guitar. I'm no innocent person with that. I know I did it. I'm one of those assholes. I get it. Pardon the language. I don't know if you allow that on your live streams, but
I'll let this one pass. This should be fine. I'll let this one
go. But Stairway to Heaven, I mean, yeah, it's overplayed, but for a very good reason. It's actually one of those overplayed songs that I haven't gotten sick of. Do I want to hear Zeppelin Stairway to Heaven on repeat all freaking day long? Absolutely the heck not. No comprende. No, absolutely not. However, it is still fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Wouldn't It Be Nice from the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I forgot that was from Pet Sounds.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's overplayed to crap too in the Beach Boys catalog.
Yeah, but so was well, actually, no. God Only Knows is not as overplayed as Wouldn't It Be Nice.
But it most certainly is too. Yeah. But was there anything? I know I have, as you said, you wanted me to talk about all these albums, but I didn't know if. Yeah, I'll let you chime in. It is your stream after all.
No, but that was all like great information. Some of that I didn't even know, which I'm glad you let everyone know about that. I think I think that if I had to choose between like what Zeppelin album would be my favorite, like from like of all time, which the top spots would be the first four albums, I would pick Zeppelin 4 because Zeppelin 4 songs really stuck with me. If I were to hear one of the songs by Led Zeppelin from Led Zeppelin 4 like on the radio or something like that, or from uh or like just at a store where it's playing like one of the songs, like it say Misty Mountain Hop, I would probably know it. I would probably know I could recognize when the levee breaks. Like any of the songs from Led Zeppelin 4 that you could hear are just like instantly recognizable. And I
Yeah.
think there's not a single bad song on that album, including Stairway to Heaven. Yes, Stairway to Heaven is beyond overplayed. Yet it is like over that song is to Led Zeppelin like Edge of 17 is to Stevie Nicks. And I but there when you really break it down, like kind of like this.
Gathering information ahead of time is also part of the test. We should have found an upperclassman to listen to. Why didn't I think about that before?
Like if you really break it down, it's a fantastic song. It's very well written. Like I know it's some people give it slack because it may have been ripped off from Spirit Taurus by Spirit, I think is what it's called.
You want to really go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah. I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole though, but it
Don't.
bu- but it's composition wise, at least dynamically, and both just how the instruments are set together, like when they come in and how they sound overall, it's just incredibly unique. And the same could be said for every other song on this album. When the levee breaks, when the levee breaks is probably one of my favorite songs off that album. Rock and roll, that's another great tune. It's just straightforward. It has the actual rock and roll sound,
Yeah.
but it has that Zeppelin 70s sound as well, along with like originality. And the same thing with Black Dog.
Zeppelin is one. I'm telling you, Zeppelin is one of those bands, and the album Zeppelin 4 here kind of shows it. Yeah, people, if you're introducing to someone to Led Zeppelin and they ask, well, what music do I know? Do you know that I like that it could be compared to? Zeppelin sounds like Zeppelin, just like Pink Floyd sounds like Pink Floyd. They're uncomparable to anything else.
Yeah. And I think so, like with Zeppelin 3 and Zeppelin 4, that's when they started to stop sounding like their influences. Because I
Yes.
know every other band, I notice with every single band, they have their influences, like, and they sound like it on their first album or their first two albums. They're gonna sound like their influences. But for Zeppelin, and Zeppelin is another example of that. But when they went on to Led Zeppelin 3 and Led Zeppelin 4, that's when they really started to sound like Led Zeppelin.
Yeah,
Like,
and I'll tell you, Led Zeppelin is a prime example of showing their influences. Their entire freaking debut album is their influences, just covers, with the exception
yeah,
of like one or two originals.
yeah, and Black Sabbath's first studio album was another example. 90% of that was their influences. Like you could hear their blues influences, you could hear their jazz influences, you could hear the other rock influences that like influenced them as a band. And and I think some of Black Sabbath's songs, at least from their debut, were covers as well. I know Evil Woman is a cover.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. I don't know about any other songs of theirs that were covers,
I only
but
knew Evil Woman.
yeah, but they're another example. Like they're blatantly their their debut album was blatantly had influences, and
Yeah,
or it was blatantly like influence based, where you can hear where you don't really hear Black Sabbath, but you do. It's like Led Zeppelin 1, like you said, it was mostly just covers. You could hear Led Zeppelin, but you hear their influences more.
yeah.
And I even hear that with Led Zeppelin 2 when with with a lot of their songs. I know some of that was that was when they started getting into more originals.
Yeah.
And then Zeppelin 3 comes along, and then they started doing more acoustics and more like actual songwriting. They became more bare bones, and I know that was one of the reasons why they went to that cottage, that Bronjauer cottage,
Hmm.
and I think they went there to write some of their songs because they wanted to have more originality to their sound or to their music.
Right, right, and it's really true. It's just it's just fantastic. Um, the progression of Led Zeppelin was very quick, and it was quick in the best of ways because
Mhm.
you have some rock bands that are just stuck in like their influences. Like you look at early rock and roll, um,
Like Chuck
roll,
Berry, maybe.
not even Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was fairly original for the most part. People like Elvis Presley or even the Rolling Stones,
Mhm.
you have your originality, of course, your own renditions of songs or songs that exist or your own songs, but a lot of covers. And that was
Yeah.
a thing that was happening during the turn of the late 50s, early 60s as a whole, anyway, across music universally. But it really showed in rock and roll and rock and what would become rock. And that mold of that like cover stuff kind of broke once music started turning into rock music started turning psychedelic. The only kind of exception to that I could think of offhand would be the band Fear Itself. It only had one release, but fantastic. They did a cover of Born Under a Bad Sign, which was a blues standard that was originally done by Albert King, I believe.
Mm.
And but they made it their own. Um, and it's just great. But
That's
yeah,
that's just like if you're familiar with the band Beck Bogert and a Piece, they were a trio band from the early to mid 70s. It consisted of Tim Bogert, who passed away last month, I believe, or he passed away last month, and I did a show about him, and Carmine Appice, the famous drummer from Cactus and Vanilla Fudge, and he was also with Beck Bogert was in those bands as well, and it had guitarist Jeff Beck,
no,
and they only released one album, and 90% of that was just like uh, stuff that Jeff Beck wrote, blues standards, and this one cover of Superstition that I think is by far one of the best covers of Superstition by Stevie Wonder. I
wow.
and like they really made it their own, and I like for a rock band for me to say that about a rock band and a Stevie Wonder song, like not
Yeah,
not to not to discredit any other bands that have covered Stevie Wonder, but that cover is one of the best covers of a Stevie Wonder song that I've ever listened to.
yeah. I'm actually not familiar, but I'll have to take your word for it. You'll have to send me a link. But it's interesting you mentioned Jeff Beck because Jeff Beck is a person who gave Jimmy Page his double-necked SG guitar.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that iconic guitar that you always see him playing while playing Stairway to Heaven. Well, you have Jeff Beck to thank for that.
Yeah, boy!
I just had
Not expecting that.
I just had to do that once. Um,
That's beautiful. Yeah, Sonny, I agree. God only knows is overplayed, but it's great. That'd be an interesting video to do, LA. You should do one day with me or someone else on your channel.
yeah,
Overplayed songs that are fantastic, regardless.
I think God Only Knows is one of the best Beach Boys songs ever written. Like I think like I know it's pretty overplayed, but when you really break it down, it's a great song. And I really have to do more research on the Beach Boys, which I think I even mentioned in my open discussion about Chicago. They did a song with Chicago in 1974 called
Yep.
Wishing You Were Here, not to be mistaken with Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd.
Right,
Their
right.
their critically acclaimed 1975 studio album with the title song. But it's called Wish.
We keep
Nah, go ahead.
talking for each other.
Nah, you can go ahead.
I actually didn't know that you knew that Chicago had sung with Brian Wilson, and not all the Beach Boys were on it. It was only Brian Wilson and one other of the members. But yeah, I didn't know you knew that, so I'm glad that you said that. Otherwise, I was probably going to mention that to you.
Yeah, it was Al Jardine and Dennis Wilson, I think that sang on it. I know there was a third person. I don't
Yeah.
remember if it was Brian or someone else. But the weird thing is why that song came to be is because their current manager / producer, or he produced a lot of their albums in the mid 70s.
Mhm.
He knew the Beach Boys and he was pretty close with the Beach Boys. So he was thinking like, wow, why doesn't Chicago and the Beach Boys get together and write a hit? Because Chicago and the Beach Boys, if everyone knows them, they're two of the biggest American bands that were known for Billboard chart toppers,
Yeah.
like both in the 60s and 70s. And having two of them together, you could create a pretty big hit. And they did, and it was Wishing You Were Here.
And they were successful. Speaking
Yeah.
of Chicago and overplayed songs, 25 or 6 to 4.
Came out.
That's a
Yeah, I would say it's for Chicago's standards and for like songs that are known. And believe it or not, that came off of Chicago's second album, Chicago, or some people know as Chicago 2, which came
right.
out in 1970, same year as Zeppelin 3.
That's also true. Very true. Yeah, it's actually interesting what happened with Chicago, but you probably talked about the whole how the titles change and all this stuff and the whole lawsuit that happened with Chicago.
Yeah. I wonder, like, there's a couple bands I know that are known for doing that, like their band followed by a number, at least in the 60s and 70s. I know that Spooky Tooth did it, or Spooky Tooth kind of did it. Their second album was called Spooky 2.
Yeah. That's such a cool first second album title.
Yeah, Spooky 2. And
But,
there was another band, but I can't remember what their name was. But Chicago, I think, was the one that started that, or it had to be Led Zeppelin or Chicago, because they both started their albums around the same time. I think actually the same year.
um, Chicago's debut album, or as they were known back then, was Chicago Transit Authority, came out in '69.
Yeah, nice.
So actually,
I had to do it just once.
but well, actually, Zeppelin and Chicago both came out the same year because Chicago Zeppelin 1 and 2 both came out in '69 too. So
Yeah.
I don't know what month and everything they came out offhand, but I'm one of them might have influenced the other. Who knows?
Yeah. It's really interesting to see like how connected certain bands were with each other, at least in the late 60s and early 70s. Led Zeppelin definitely made no exception with that, because they influenced a sliver of bands in the 70s like Aerosmith, Heart. Heart has gone on record saying that they are, at least the two main, Ann and Nancy Wilson, I think are their names. They stated that Led Zeppelin's one of their biggest influences.
That I did not know, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I know Tom Hamilton stated that Tom Hamilton, the bassist of Aerosmith,
Mm-hmm.
he stated that John Paul Jones was one of his biggest influences.
Huh.
John Paul Jones and who else? Tom Hamilton and Geddy Lee were were stated that John Paul Jones is one of their influences.
Oh, okay. Very cool. So, was there anything else more we had to say about Zeppelin 3 or 4? We kind of derailed there a little bit, but if all relative and all related, but
Yeah, that's all that it was about, was just the discussion. Whatever we talked about was definitely had meaning to today. Um I I don't know if you like have anything you want to say about the actual vinyl record itself, but I've always think this. I always think that these, like, hearing the vinyl is always far more pleasant than hearing it on, say, digital or on CD, because it's like a whole new experience when you really like put it on a vinyl record and set it to, and set it to play.
Well, listening to vinyl records versus playing something on any DSP, digital service provider such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon MP3, the whole nine yards, or Amazon Music nowadays. They used to be Amazon MP3. It's a whole different experience as a whole. And even vinyl records to CDs and cassettes have a whole kind of different experience. They all kind of have their own unique experience. However, the physical format versus the digital definitely has a difference. For example, as I said earlier, with Zeppelin 3, you don't get the spin wheel. You don't get to see all those imageries. You probably might not have even known that was a thing, even if you were a Zeppelin fan and you are just used to streaming. You might not have known that was a thing. That's a new Easter egg that you guys now know. Zeppelin, it's not even exclusive to Zeppelin, but you hear a vinyl record and listening to it, it's an experience. When you go put on a vinyl record, so let's do this streaming first. You open up your phone, your computer, or whatever you're listening to music, or you're triggering your Echo Dot or Google or whatever, talking to it with the voiceover. You tell it to play it, or you type something on your phone, you push a couple things, tap a piece of glass a couple times, and you get your thing. That's all fine and dandy. That's how I listen to music in my car nowadays. My CD player broke. That's my only way I get to listen to music if I'm just listening to FM radio or something.
Yeah.
Which I do too. There's nothing wrong with that. I noticeably could tell sometimes, not always, but there are times where I could tell that this audio source is significantly less quality compared to even the CD, not even comparing the vinyl. Spotify actually just announced that they're going to be doing a new tier of their subscription service in a couple months down the line that it's going to be in competition of other DSPs that have actually started doing the higher quality, higher resolution audio files. But so I'm actually very interested to see how that'll compare to CDs and vinyl records, and maybe universally it'll sound significantly better. I don't know. We could all hope, especially since it's most likely going to be a higher price point. But that's a lot of you're getting the music, and quality of the music, sound quality aside, that's it. You're pushing a couple things and you're like, okay, here's some tunes. Whether you're jogging down the street, even listening to it in your headphones, just not doing anything else, sitting in your bed vibing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's great and dandy. You're enjoying your tunes, but like, okay. Well, the thing with the record, you're holding something physical. You could touch it. You could play with it. You could bend it over backwards. You could fold it every which way. If it's a gatefold, you're able to look at the band members' faces that are shown on the cover. You get to pull out the sleeve. You get to pull out the record. You get to look at the colors of the record or the custom records labels. Zeppelin didn't have custom record labels. It was just a generic green and red Atlantic Records record label that they had at the time. With the exception of Zeppelin 4, they had the 4 symbols on it. That was the only like custom thing they really did with their labels. You get to read the credits on the label of it. You could read that on the record jacket. You can also read the credits and all that stuff. Yeah, you can Wikipedia all that stuff by putting, but you're holding something in your hand. Yeah, you can argue you're holding your phone in your hand, but it's different,
It's not as like tedious either, I don't think. Like because at least when you're listening to the album while you're, playing it on the record, you could look at the back and look at this. You could look at the back of the record and see like the personnel, the date, the year it came out, and all this other stuff. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and that everything is accurate on the record. It's not necessarily accurate on the internet, because it was very uncommon. Even though there were back in the day, of course, mistakes and all this stuff. We're all humans after all. Yeah, there were printing errors and stuff like that happened, and then you have fancy, exclusive, very rare misprints of stuff. But 99% of the time, you get accurate stuff, which, I mean, anyone or anything has any thought or anything, it's on the internet. If someone believes a group of people believe that the sky is purple, there's probably some club on the internet saying, "No, the sky's purple club." So you can't always trust anything on the internet. But not even just that. I was showing with Zeppelin 4. You have the lyrics "Stairway to Heaven." You could read the lyrics along with it. You're holding something in your hand. There's something about it that you get. It's more fun and bigger text and all this stuff and photos and all this that you just don't get when Googling lyrics or all this stuff. The same with the experience of actually putting a stylus into a groove of a record and flipping it over. I don't know. For me, usually I don't find that to be an inconvenience. I don't mind it. I enjoy it. The thing that bothers me in regards to needing to do that is when, back in the 80s, for example, Journey's Greatest Hits, it was released back in the day, single LP. Nowadays, you want to buy a new copy of it, it's on 2 LPs. That's what bothers me. I know there's that's going down another rabbit hole we don't need to go in for this video, because it could go multiple different directions as to why they do that. But flipping the record that many times, at least for that album, bothers me. Radiohead's OK Computer that came out in 1999, flipping it that many times, that's a double LP, flipping it that many, doesn't bother me as much. But, the whole experience of flipping the record over is just a nice experience. If you have an equalizer in your setup, fine-tuning your sound to be exactly what you want. It's all analog, at least original vinyl records and stuff that was around back in the olden days before digital started taking over in the 80s. Yes, digital is not necessarily modern. That was around in the 80s. If you look at some records that were put out by MCA Records in the day, in one of the corners of the record jackets, sometimes it says digital. A prime example would be the country artist George Strait, who was on MCA Records at the time. You'll see the words digital written across, printed on the sleeve. So people are talking about how, digital of modern albums don't sound good. Well, they had digital back in the 80s, so you're just being a fucking freaking gatekeeper. You're just being so that's a whole nother thing. But the thing with the acoustic records that we get nowadays, they are just warmer sounding. And I'm just not that hearing it on streaming is cold and harsh, but there's a certain warmth to it and welcoming in nature that you don't necessarily get with just streaming. As well as anybody can push a button. Like, okay, cool. You have even a little bit of a learning curve when you're playing with records, which is also another fun thing. You get to learn how to do it. And you get to learn how to tinker with the record player if something goes wrong. You get to learn how to replace your stylus. You get to change your motor. You get to replace, if you have a belt driven versus a direct drive turntable, you have a belt driven turntable. Like one of my turntables says, you need to replace the belt. You get to take off the platter. You get to replace the belt. You get to have this whole hands-on experience. I don't know. I just like doing things and experiencing things. I love looking at photos that people take of the Grand Canyon. I looked at that for years. But then when I went in January of 2020 to the actual Grand Canyon myself, it's like night and day. It's just a different experience. Something could look beautiful in a photograph. Yeah, sure.
Like when I
experience.
Like when I went to London for the first time, like when I actually visited the city of London, like it was it was a whole it's a whole different experience. And I just remember like over here, my record player, I remember I had to learn a bunch of new things when it came to a record player, because at the time when I was still living at my old house, my dad showed me how to use his record player, and then suddenly for Christmas, I believe it was about almost 5 years ago, Christmas of 2016, I got that record player. and I was very hands-on for me, at least for a beginner who's never used vinyl, never played a vinyl record. It taught me a couple of things, and it taught me how to, put the stylus onto the record and how to get it playing and what I have to tune into, just
Right.
all that other stuff. And I, to this day, I would, whenever I have the time, I would like to take out a record and just play it. And it's a whole nother experience. Like when I put Zeppelin 4 onto the record player, Zeppelin 4, I remember the Battle of Evermore sounded so much brighter and so much like wider. Like the sound was so much wider
Mm-hmm.
and way more brighter than had I listened to it on digital. And honestly, it made me appreciate that song a lot more than I could have had I listened to it on digital.
Yeah. And a lot of my early days of discovering music was on CD. I really didn't have any streaming service until about a year ago. And I'll tell you, even hearing my CDs that either I owned in my own collection or my parents' CDs, when I got the vinyl record versions of things, I will never forget the first time I heard 3 specific songs on vinyl record. First one, Ozzy Osbourne's Bark at the Moon, title track, opening track to the album. I mean, I have the reissue CD that was done in the early 2000s with the 2 or 3 bonus tracks after it, so I have a modern sounding CD of it. But the older pressing, it's an original pressing of the album. I remember just hearing the reverb, fancy term for echo for those who don't know, and of the guitar riff. Ozzy's singing didn't even come in yet. I was just like, I literally called my mom in, and I was just like, listen to this. Like, how much she appreciated or knew what I was talking about, I have no freaking clue. But she was happy to see me excited and just was playing along with it.
Yeah,
Same thing happened with the Cars debut album. Opening track again, actually. Just what I needed. Holy crap. I mean, I was hearing the difference already with dum bum 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 bum, just like the guitars.
Yeah.
But you know what really got into kicking it into high gear was when this keyboard Philip. Holy smokes. That was it was just crazy. Now don't get me wrong. Every single version of songs that you hear and all this stuff are not necessarily going to be like night and day like what I'm talking about. But I'll tell you, but when they're there and you notice. Again, the third one, Kansas's album Point of No Return, the song Dust in the Wind.
I bet that sounds beautiful on vinyl.
Oh, talking about dynamic range on Zeppelin 3. I mean, that album as a whole, but that specific song, I was nearly in tears. Oh my God. It was like no other. There's some albums, don't get me wrong, that it's very similar in quality that you'll get with modern albums. For example, No Prayer for the Wicked by Panic at the Disco, or Ava Max's album Heaven and Hell that just came out this past fall. Some of these albums sound very similar, if not identical, to the streaming service. But then you have albums that are modern, such as Daft Punk's 2013 album, Random Access Memories.
Great album, by the way.
One of my favorite albums from the 2010s. Hearing that on vinyl record compared to digital or CD, night and day. Same with 21 Pilots' Blurry Face, night and day. It's with Blurry Face by 21 Pilots, you hear the bass and all this stuff a lot more richer and all that. With Random Access Memories, you just really hear the great production and genius that Nile Rodgers is. And for those of you who don't know who Nile Rodgers is, he was relevant producing music in the 1970s when disco was a thing. There's a reason why Random Access Memories is called the modern disco album, because Nile Rodgers is producing it as well as the funky grooves that are on that album. listen to the production value of Sister Sledge's "We Are Family" and listen to the production value on, say, even the most popular song off of Random Access Memories, "Get Lucky." Sure, there's a 40-some year difference, so the sound is going to be a little bit different, but the production and quality is still there. It sounds fantastic just the same. And I'll tell you, disco albums, they're pretty damn well produced too. There's some of the best produced albums of that time.
And even looking back to them, like especially like Nile Rodgers and Chic, like
Oh yeah,
I think those are like the best performance disco songs, or at least the best, not just in production but in performance as well. Like when you hear Nile Rodgers guitar with Bernard Edwards bass, it's like a whole new experience, and I could not imagine it being on vinyl. Like I could imagine hearing everybody dance on vinyl like that. That's probably a whole new experience, a whole nother plane of existence, or a whole nother plane. Just
yeah,
hearing that, like just hearing those sounds together. Like I always thought vinyl had a brighter sound, and a lot of the low end that you don't hear in digital, or that doesn't shine as much in digital, shines more in vinyl. Like
yeah.
say Black Sabbath Volume 4, their 1972, I think, fourth album, Black
Yeah.
Sabbath's fourth album that came out in 72. I think it was Wheels of Confusion
Oh
is what it
yeah.
was called. The drums on that song, hearing it, because I have it on vinyl, I have the American release on vinyl. Hearing the drums on that record was just a whole nother experience.
It really is. My dad, as a kid, he didn't have a whole lot of albums on vinyl record as a kid, but he had a album called "A Night at Studio 54," which was just pretty much a disco comp album, and Chic is on that. I think it's actually this. I think it's the song "La Freak" with their biggest hit. But next time you're over my house, we'll have to play it.
Yeah,
you can hear some of this disco stuff because we both are passionate, but you're still fairly new to it compared to me. So
yeah, and I would love to. I always love learning, and I'm always love hearing new things.
well, yeah, and as I said, one day when you have a place of your own, you're gonna upgrade your setup and all that stuff, and you're gonna have even better sound. And I mean, it's a constant money pit. Records, there's a joke. Everybody goes into record collecting for the price and the inconvenience.
But the funny thing is, I think I saw this article. I read this article a couple of years ago. It was either in 2019 or 2020. It was either last year or the year before. Vinyl records started outselling CDs for the first time since the 80s.
Yep.
Which I was amazed hearing that, but I wasn't surprised, because I'm starting to see, I think you and I are both starting to see an appreciation for vinyl records nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I have ever since my early days of music collecting, a little over 12 years ago. But I never thought I'd see the day where CD players were starting to not being vehicles. I never thought I would see in places like Walmart, Target, or even FYE a bigger vinyl record section than CDs.
Yeah.
It's just nuts. 100% true. Broken. No space left in my house. Yeah, Sonny, I'm so glad. I don't know if I told you, Sonny, I got a new job, and I'm still just saving my pennies just as much as I was even when I was getting minimum wage payments at my old job, because I'm just like, I'll get the stuff that I really want, really need,
Yeah, I think that.
And also, I need to lug all this stuff out of my parents' house eventually too. So that's gonna be a whole nother interesting thing. Just my music collection alone.
Maybe you'll get more space to put your vinyls in your music.
I am gonna have an entire room dedicated to my own place whenever that happens.
Yeah. Whenever I can buy my own house, I'm definitely gonna have one of those big shelves filled with vinyls, kind of like what you got at your place.
Yeah. And everybody says go to IKEA for the collapsed shelves. Don't get me wrong, they're great, but you can get the exact same quality, significantly cheaper at Walmart with the Better Homes and Gardens version.
Oh,
If
wow.
you, yeah, those are the ones I use. IKEA is just a name. It's just like any other name brand thing. It's pretty much the exact same quality, but it's the exact same product. I mean, it's different in this regard, but like you look at Band-Aids, you get their Band-Aid brand, or you could get your local grocery store brand. They're the exact same thing, just different branding. Or you look at granola bars. You look at your local grocery store branded granola bars, you get the same looking one at the name brand. Just about the exact same thing. You know why? It's called marketing. My undergraduate marketing degree, just branding is a ploy to make you spend more money. So save and get our shelves. You found yours on the side of the street. Wow, that's called luck.
Yeah. Got lucky, get lucky.
Yeah. We're up all night for good fun. We're up all night to find mine. My shelves on the side of the road. We're up all night to get lucky. Gonna start organizing records. We're gonna organize them all night. We're gonna get lucky and spin some tunes.
Yeah.
Yeah. LA, if you don't know who Sunny is, Instagram her. She's great. She's vinyl community person, but she doesn't do YouTube or anything like that, rather than the video that we did on my channel. Put the record on. She is great. Sunny is fantastic. So you'd like what she has to post. You like the record stuff I post on my RetroSpinVinyl account, so I know you'll like what she does. She is even fancier than me because she'll dress up along with her records. She'll do all sorts of fun stuff. She'll pose in front of her record stuff. I just take a photo of what's spinning. Occasionally, I'll have to something fancy. Like I did a fancy pose with an Elvis Costello record once, but that got a lot of views. I should do more of that because a lot of people like that. I got a lot of comments and likes on that one. But yeah, I just post what's currently spinning when I spin something. I do a spin of the day on my Instagram. But no, Sunny is the best. Sunny, you are.
Debate who's the best vinyl channel.
Well, all vinyl channels have their own perks to them for various reasons, and have their own great thing that is brought to the table. And in something that's such a male-dominated hobby, it's great to see people like Sunny in the female realm of the vinyl world and get her perspective and what she likes, as well as the vinyl community on Instagram is a lot more equal in regards to male female kind of dominance, because there's a lot of female Instagram vinyl community people. YouTube, it's a little bit more male dominated, but it's great to see women rising up and all that stuff. It's great. And as I said, her stuff is always fun. I always love talking to her and seeing what she's posting. So LA, check her out. You will not be disappointed. And if you are, you need to smack yourself upside the head.
That reminds me, there actually is this female vinyl or like album connoisseur on YouTube that I've been following recently. I think her name is Niam or Naim. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Oh, the frog nerd.
Yes, that's her name.
Nymph. Yes.
That's how it's pronounced.
Nymph, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Nymph. Yeah.
I believe she's from England, and she does a lot of prog rock stuff, and I would definitely love to have her on the channel one of these days if I would get the opportunity.
Do you comment on her channel or talk to her at all in her comments, or do you follow her on Instagram?
No, I didn't even know she had an Instagram. I'll have a look at that, and I'll hit her up and tell her about her content. I really do enjoy a lot of her stuff. And
she's great. I personally talked to her, and I have her. I mean, I don't have her personal contact information, but I have more than just Instagram stuff. Like I have a way to like DM her outside of Instagram if I so chose. So if you wanted me to try to give you the hookup, I mean, you and her could talk King Crimson or something like that, or Genesis.
Yeah. Or
if you were, you could totally get Nymph on your channel. Like I'm impressed that you knew who Nymph was. She's a very new channel in the vinyl community. She's only been there for about a month, and she's got 11K subs.
Oh wow.
She's doing something right that none of us are doing. But Dylan, the record spinner, LA. I don't know if you've seen in my Instagram on my. Oh, actually, yeah. LA, the person who I was telling you about the other day, who did the Steve Hackett interview. This is him.
Yeah, I haven't got around to see that whole video, but that was incredible that he got to talk to the Steve Hackett from Genesis.
Yep, this is him.
Yeah, I
hang out with him. He I'm not going to say on the internet, but he lives in the same state as us, just in the southern portion. So, so I've gotten to hang out with him, spin some tunes. If you go back on my RetroSpinVinyl channel, you'll see a video or two with us grabbing some records.
Yeah, I won't. Yeah, that's all right. I'll definitely have to check. I'll definitely have to check that out, and I'll definitely check out his channel. But yeah, I remember you actually talked to Steve Hackett from Genesis. That's like wow. Like, if I will let him know that I personally prefer the prog era for Genesis. Like, I have nothing against the pop era. The pop era has some amazing tunes, has some great parts, and they were great live from what I heard. But the prog era of Genesis was like my favorite of all time. Like, hands down, my favorite Genesis record would be Selling England by the Pound.
Oh yeah. Like, I remember when you told me when you first discovered it a couple years ago how much you were loving it. And I was like, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I was the first time that I listened to that album was actually when I was still in England. I was on my way to Windsor Castle. I was taking a train from Paddington Station, and I went all the way and I was heading to Windsor Castle. It was like a 30-minute train ride, I had to make a couple stops, but overall it was like 30 minutes. And I took some time to listen to Selling England by the Pound and a few other Genesis songs, but I remember the first time hearing Firth the Fifth was like hearing that flute part. I think I was like on the train, and this is just like a vibe check kind of thing, or like you kind of like a vibey kind of experience. But like, I was sitting on the train outside looking out the window, and as that happens, I'm just hearing like Peter Gabriel's flute solo, and like, it's just like, wow.
Yeah, Selling England by the Pound is one of my Genesis Grail albums to own one day. I just can't. I've seen it in a record store 1 or 2 times, but not in condition that I'm willing to pay the price that they're asking for it. $7 for the album if it's in good condition, yeah, worth it, but not for the condition it was in.
If I'm ever to see it at the record store near me, the one that I usually go to,
yeah,
I'm getting it. Like, I'm no questions asked. I am getting that record because that's how much I love that album.
Yeah, I'm telling you, Selling England, Trick of the Tail, and Nursery Crime are the major ones that I need to get. Yeah. I mean, a Music Box, holy, what a way. I think that's the opening track to Nursery Crime, if I'm not mistaken. And what a way to open it.
And that's actually, Nursery Crime has one of the first instances of Phil Collins singing.
That's something I missed out, and it's a piece of Genesis knowledge I don't have, but I'm also still learning Genesis. So I'm not as well-versed as you and Dylan. Dylan is the record spinner's name for your reference.
Yeah, so, I'd love to have him on the show as well.
Who, Dylan? Dylan. Well, if Dylan is okay with it, I told you I have my connections to Nymph, but I have even more connections with Dylan because I talk to Dylan on a daily basis. So if you want to make that happen, if you guys are all okay with me connecting you two together, I most certainly can make that happen.
I'm cool with it, but we just need his confirmation.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not just going to give people's contact information without approval, but yeah, you guys would get along. I mean, you with your mutual prog love. I mean, you would get together great.
Yeah, like my buddy James from Ramapo would probably get. Oh, we got a confirmation. He's down.
All right, he's getting call disturbed. He's getting down with the sickness. Oh,
yeah. Oh,
All right, cool. Then I'll make that happen. And you know what? Dylan, actually, me and LA have actually gone record shopping together too. So it's been fun. And speaking of early, later pop era Genesis, I'm telling you, I'm a sucker for the album Invisible Touch.
I like when I originally was getting into Genesis, I wasn't crazy about that album, but looking back to it now, it's actually pretty good. Like there's some really, really good sophisticated tunes like Tonight, Tonight, Tonight.
Tonight.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorites from that album. And Land of Confusion, I've always thought was a great tune. I think both their version and Disturbed's version are both incredibly enjoyable tunes.
I actually didn't know there was a Disturbed version, but
Yeah, off of 10,000 Fists, they had a cover of Land of Confusion.
I haven't heard that. That's my favorite Disturbed album. I haven't heard that album in years. I might not have ever even noticed it because I was listening to that in early high school before I knew much of what I knew about music. So, that's funny, Sonny. The amount of songs I've sung, I could release a cover album.
Yeah. Would it be like Pat Boone's In a Metal Mood?
No.
That album is like great meme material, I think.
That's even worse than Rick rolling.
That album, I just look at that album as nothing more than just pure meme material.
No, you're right. But let's see. I lost my train of thought there for a second. Yeah, well, if it comes back, it comes back. If it don't, it don't. But yeah. Oh yeah, that's what I was gonna say. In regards to covers, this is another connection. You and Dylan are both big Rush fans.
Oh yeah, that's perfect.
And I'll tell you, I don't know, LA, if you've ever seen it, but when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I did a cover of Tom Sawyer on my Mike Guitar Player 07 music performance YouTube channel.
Oh no, I haven't.
And that was before I hit puberty. So I was like, I'm on it. Like I was Giddy Lee. What, step aside. No, like, and my friend Max was playing the guitar for it. I was able to hit the notes back then. And then the summer between sophomore year and junior year of high school, I went from a tenor 1 in choir to a bass 2. So,
that's quite a transition.
Yeah, my little boys dropped quite a bit that year, or that summer. Those 3 months, like I was just like, wait, what? I'm able to hit this note now? No complaints.
That was like when I was in high school, I actually did 3 different voice types, and it was for different events. Like when I was in concert choir, I was a tenor 2, but
Okay.
when I was in the musical my senior year, I was with the basses and baritones because my part was for a baritone, or at least for my singing role, because I had a singing role in the musical that I was in, and I was singing with the basses, and that was my first time ever singing with the basses. And I was in this I was in this honors choir called Chamber Singers.
Oh yeah.
And I sang tenor 1 there. So it fluctuated.
Which musical did you sing in? I know you've probably told me about your experience, but I just don't know which one you're referencing.
My Favorite Year. That was the only one in my high school that I had a singing an actual singing role, like a solo singing role where I'm singing by myself.
Okay. I didn't do any musical theater in high school. I did show choir, which was kind of like a glee club, singing and dancing, but rather than the concert choir and honors choir and all that, that was about it. My acting days ceased to exist after middle school, when I was in my middle school's production of High School Musical 1 and 2 Junior, respectively. Both of them were junior. Actually, this photo back here was actually my I don't remember if that was 7th or 8th grade, but that's actually the photo they had. Like, they had a wall going down to the auditorium of the cast.
Mhm.
My last name is spelled wrong, and to this day I'm bitter about it. But that's actually a photo of me, my what's it, promo shot or whatever it's called.
Mhm. That's those DVDs down there you see under my Xbox One,
Yeah,
next to my pedal board.
Yeah.
Some of those DVDs are from my musical and play all the musicals and plays that I've been in.
Yep, I got that behind me in my closet here.
Yeah.
My
So,
DVDs, Blu-rays. It's crazy.
all right. So before I, end this show, do you have anything you want to say about just Led Zeppelin or the vinyls, or just any additional information on just vinyls in general, and least on just how just these of albums in particular, how they would compare to other records from back then, or other vinyl records that would have a similar sound?
Other vinyl records from the time that would have similar sound, I don't think there's really anything comparable to the sound quality of Zeppelin. They're some of the best recorded acts of the time. Um, as we've mentioned earlier, with like bands like Deep Purple or Black Sabbath. Actually, Black Sabbath, I'm not going to put Black Sabbath in there. Black Sabbath fits in with the same recording goodness that these guys are in. But like Deep Purple, like even Elton John, like early Elton John of this time, yeah, it's not as good recording wise. They're not bad, but the sound quality is just not there with him. When it comes to Elton John,
Yeah, he was still working on his craft. He was still shaping it, I think.
yeah, I would have to say seven. I could go as far back as 72 with Honky Chatu, but I would really say 73 with Elton John. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road is really when the recording and production and everything really started to blossom. And then, of course, we have Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy and Blue Moves and Madman Across the Water was older, but
and Rock of the Westies, that had some pretty good.
That's it. Island Girl.
Yeah.
There's another one, Sonny. I could put that on my album.
Yeah, I think Elton John, like the differences between Led Zeppelin and Elton John, I don't mean to cut you off there.
No, you're good.
But with Elton John, like I feel like he didn't really meet his production and performance peak until Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which I think that was where everything was where it needed to be. These, I think, as for Led Zeppelin, 4 was where everything needed to be, both musically and in the studio, both production and performance wise, like recording overall performance. This was definitely where Led Zeppelin needed to be. And like Elton John, like I would compare this to Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah. Because I'm telling you, because it's interesting. Because we could compare Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and Zeppelin 4 perfectly here. Because get this. So anybody who's familiar with both albums, Sonny, I actually meant to send you an email with this, a little bit of an Elton John piano cover thing. So I have to actually send you that. But anyway, so the opening tracks for both of those albums, Black Dog for Zeppelin 4 and Funeral for a Friend - Love Lies Bleeding on Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Both albums open up with very quiet Zeppelin with the whoop, 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 just a muted guitar. And then with Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, it says like boom, 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 just quiet, calm. You hear that guitar riff with Black Dog. You hear Robert playing, hey, hey, mama said the way you move, gonna make you sweat, gonna make you groove. And then it explodes. Well, so does it with the instrumental parts of Funeral for a Friend. Because it's like, ba-da-bum, bum, ba-da-bum, bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, ba-da-bum, bum. Well, Then you start getting the synthesizer coming into those arpeggios, and then bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, bum. And then, of course, it gets quieter again with it. Just the piano stuff. And then it goes into the heavy rocking. Bum, 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 bum. And then, of course, that's 6 minutes into the tune, and then Love Lies Bleeding starts coming in, and then he starts singing it. But those highs and lows that coming in and out through Funeral for a Friend right before the opening of Love Lies Bleeding, same thing with Zeppelin with Black Dog.
Yeah, and rock and roll. Like there's
you get the quiet guitar and vocals, at least a quiet intro guitar and vocals, and then you have the heavy hitter with the guitar riffs and then the chorus. I would compare it's different genres, but it's, you know what, that's just a perfect example of how two acts really got their production and musical A game all around top tier in some of their most iconic works. And their opening tracks are sonically pleasing in exact same ways. Who would have thought to compare Zeppelin and Elton John? Nobody. That's unheard of until now. But but the quality is like Zeppelin 3, even though it's in the same vein as greatness in regards to production and all that with Zeppelin 4. Zeppelin 4 and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, for example. You can't compare Zeppelin this album to You Can't Mess Around with Jim by Jim Croce. Even though for the genre, Jim Croce's album is very well recorded and all in the same time, but it's not comparable to that. It's not comparable to Seals and Crofts' Diamond Girl or Summer Breeze, which were also popular at the time. It's not comparable to Machine Head by Deep Purple. The production value just is not there.
Yeah, and the musicality is also very it's not as similar to, say, the comparison we made with Led Zeppelin and Elton John, at least with dynamically, because say with You Don't Mess Around with Jim, they had Time in a Bottle, which stayed very consistent throughout the song, like with the way that, the timbre and the dynamics overall with the song they just stayed very consistent throughout the song, which not to say it was bad, which it wasn't bad. It was actually really good. But that was the thing for Jim Croce's music. With Led Zeppelin's music, it was all about knowing when to hit hard and when to hold back. And that's the same thing. The same thing could be said with Elton John's music as well.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, all these are top tier releases by these people. But if we're comparing it to other things of that era, they are not comparable. Machine Head, love it. A great album. One of Deep Purple's best, especially of their early works.
Yeah.
But it's just not the same. Kiss.
Dress to Kill.
Oh, Dress to Kill. Don't get me started with the production on that. That ain't that great. That and Hotter Than Hell, I'm very disappointed with those production values. It's interesting. With Kiss, their debut album's production is raw, bountiful, and beautiful. And then you get Hotter Than Hell and Dress to Kill, and I'm just like, what?
Destroyer was when they started picking up the pace, I think.
What's that?
Destroyer is when I think they started really picking up the pace with the production.
Yeah, because you get their debut, you get Alive, and then you get Destroyer. All great production. Then you get those in-between things that are it's almost a letdown. You're almost downgrading your quality. I don't know the backstory behind Kiss. Dylan over the record spinner, he knows Kiss like the back of his hand. He would know better than me. I'm probably going to get crucified later if he's still in here for making those comments about Hotter Than Hell and Dress to Kill. He loves them. But no, it's the production is not there. Of the albums we talked about, Destroyer would be the one that's comparable best to probably Zeppelin 4 in dynamics and everything. Detroit Rock City, you get the opening track again. Quiet, bam. It's
Shout It Out Loud. That's another.
Shout it out loud. Every time I sing a song, I literally think of this cover album that Sonny mentioned now.
It's the exact same with the dynamics and the timbre of the song. Like it's very high energy, and it also chooses when it wants to like be laid back. Like Zeppelin 4 was just that album. I think that's what made it the perfect Led Zeppelin album
Yeah.
because like they had really hard hitting songs, but they also had like songs where they were laid back, and there were songs that they did both, like Stairway to Heaven. It started out nice and light, and everything was just held back and just calm, and then like as the song went on, it's like a slow crescendo. It's
Yeah.
it was like going on to stronger and hard hitting to a harder hitting sound, and that's what made that's what's to truly appreciate with Stairway to Heaven. Like I know it's a really overplayed tune, but when you break it down, it's still a magnificent song. Like there's a
Technically
reason.
and sonically.
Yeah. It's yeah, like we may all agree it's an overplayed, it's an overrated song, yes, but when you really take to consideration why it's big, why it's like their
Right.
most popular song or one of their most popular songs, it's because it's like dynamically their best song. It's dynamically their best song because they knew what they were doing and they knew what they were doing with this album in general.
Yeah. And I mean, don't get me wrong, we get other stuff with production with like Achilles' Last Stand later on. Like
Yeah,
it-
from Presence
if we keep talking dynamically and all this stuff, yeah, it's all there.
or
I
In
mean,
My Time of Dying from Physical Graffiti.
oh yeah. And then you get but then you have albums like we're comparing it again to albums of the time. You get Meatloaf's Bad Out of Hell. It's great album. Everything about it's uh, a little too many ballads on it for me for that specific album. Even though they're all fantastic and it is a perfect album overall, and it's still great. Maybe I've just gotten sick of hearing them over time, but even like Paradise by the Dashboard, like even with the dynamics on it, the production value isn't there. And you know what? I don't know if it's just the lack of funding for some of these albums, or if it is just the production value of the genre, or who they're working with, or the producer's production style. I don't know what it is. Um, but some of these, I mean, Kiss is a prime example. I'm glad you agree with me. Like the production on the debut album compared to the subsequent 2 or 3 releases, we're not on the same great level as a debut.
Yeah. And you're going to get that. Like look at Metallica, their first 4 albums had like really mediocre production. Like
Yeah.
and even they would say themselves too, like their production was really not where it needed to be. I think production wise, they weren't where they needed to be until the Black album.
Yeah, exactly. And then they went to the production value of Death Magnetic later on, but but that's a loudness worse thing still.
Yeah.
At that time, uh,
Um,
same
I
with
mean,
Saint, but
yeah, and you could look at albums like Red Hot Chili Peppers with Blood Sugar Sex Magic or One Hot Minute, which had
yeah,
I think some of their best work on it. At least with One Hot Minute, I think One Hot Minute is probably their best album production wise. And this is just my opinion. I know people are probably going to be like, probably going to disagree with me. They'll say this another album was better, which is totally okay. That's their opinion. But I think everything was where it needed to be on their 2 albums, Blood Sugar Sex Magic and One Hot Minute.
I was gonna say I think the best produced Chili Peppers albums, and thank you for talking about One Hot Minute because everybody disregards that album for whatever reason, and it's absolutely
I,
stunning of an album. But
yeah.
I think the best produced albums would be Mother's Milk, One Hot Minute, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, and By the Way.
Mm,
Stadium Arcadium could be in there too, but that's a classic
yeah,
early. Um,
from their like prime or like their most notable eras.
yeah, yeah. And Sonny, I do want to release an album on vinyl one day.
Yeah, same.
We'll see what happens. I do have a concept album in the works, or concept EP, but
Yeah. Um, I think honestly that I don't have too much to say about Zeppelin 4 and just the production aspect and everything. Is there anything else?
No, I mean, really, I mean, we could talk about each of the instruments and all this stuff, but really, it is just as good as it can be. Unless you listen to it yourself, you really are missing out. It's just great.
Yeah.
It's just the recording quality is like none other. It really isn't.
Yeah, and Sunny says she'll be your first customer when you make an album on vinyl. Or
I can make that happen.
yeah, I gave you a follow on Instagram, by the way, Sunny. I'm gonna.
Oh, good, you found it.
Yeah, I ended up finding her Instagram, but honestly, yeah, that's honestly how I'll end this. Like just from talking about the overall production and just aspect of the vinyls and what makes this album shine. Like,
Honestly, if we're to shorten it to a little short and sweet thing, it all comes down to how it was recorded,
mhm,
the quality of the playing of the band members themselves,
yeah,
the way it was recorded, the production value of what the engineers were doing behind the scenes on. I don't know what it was on. I don't know if they're both Jimmy Page production. Are they both Jimmy Page producing it?
they might be. Let me double check.
Oh yeah, they're both. Yeah, so both albums are produced by Jimmy Page.
Oh,
They're both produced by Jimmy Page. So yeah, the production value of that, as well as it being on, if we're talking about physical media, the vinyl record adding the warmth to it.
yeah,
And it's weird. Unless you experience it, it's really hard to understand what I mean by that. But it's just all around better dynamic range. Whereas on digital files, you can have it. Well, not always. If you have a good digital file, you could hear just as much a dynamic range as these records, truthfully. But you just can get compressed audio, which in short means you're literally chopping off pieces of the dynamics, literally, and cutting them off. So, but yeah, to be short and sweet, it's just literally band members playing, production value, the way it's recorded, and the warmth of the record. That's what makes these records that great, and that's what makes it even that much better on vinyl record.
yeah.
And thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I honestly could not have said that better myself.
Thank you.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed the stream. Like, comment, share, and subscribe if you want to see videos similar to this one. Instagram at LA Perez Works. If you want any updates regarding the podcast, I usually post it there on my Instagram story. And you could also give Mike a follow on Instagram at RetroSpinVinyl. And I believe he has another Instagram. Let me just type that up for you.
Yeah, the other one is Mike Guitar Player 07. But if you're looking for the vinyl record and music talk like this, what we're doing here, RetroSpinVinyl is the place to find it. On Instagram, it's more my personal, me playing like my music, my performance stuff, as well as like little things about. It's a more personalized one of my life kind of thing. Like the other week when we had 3 feet of snow here, I posted a photo of the snow blower that was barely able to even reach the snow kind of thing. I have a photo of like my family. I post photos of my dog, all these things that you don't necessarily get on RetroSpinVinyl. You get vinyl records and music talk on RetroSpinVinyl. So, yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed, Sunny. Thank you, Dylan, and thank you to, I think it was Red was the guy's name who came before.
Red sings the blues. Yeah, it was my buddy Greg.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for not only joining us here, but thank you to LA for having me here.
Yeah, of course. It was honestly a blast. I had a lot of fun, and I'd definitely love to have you again. I just need to think of more vinyls we can discuss that you and I both have.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And if you want, I don't know if it's on which YouTube channel it's on, but me and LA talked about music on my channel, As well as if you want a Zeppelin-oriented video, Sunny in the chat here and I also did a video on RetroSpinVinyl, the YouTube channel, about Zeppelin. And if you stick around to the end of that video, we both ranked Zeppelin's discography. I broke Sunny's heart, but you know, she understands. So
I put his channel in the description as well for you guys to check out. RetroSpinVinyl, check out his channel. And I'll get to I'll get Sunny's Instagram as well to give her a follow. I'll write that down.
Yeah. And pretty much thanks to everybody for joining us here on this adventure of record fun stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Sunny forgives me, thank goodness.
All right. Put that out here too.
I'm in the clear. I'm in the clear.
Yeah. Instagram out for Sunny. You unless she doesn't, would you want me to put out your Instagram there, Sunny? If not, it's totally fine. But guys, tune in tomorrow. I believe around 5. I will keep you guys updated if I change the time. But next tomorrow will be cringe performance of the week. This will be my last cringe performance of the week for a while. So let's put the record on.
Yep,
So, okay.
there.
Give her a follow. I will find it. Put the record on. Give that. Put the record on. All right. Yeah, give her a follow. Guys, I will see you next time. And like I said, tune in tomorrow. I'll keep you guys updated. It should be around 5, but if anything changes, just look to my Instagram story and we should be good. Anyways, have a good rest of your night. And as always, stay tuned.
Rock on, y'all.